a number of pre-conference webinars that have taken place over the last month or two. So this conference is really reflecting on what's been achieved since our last conference a year ago, and to look at consolidating the Kenya restoration movement. The event is being recorded. We're in a webinar format today. So if you're a participant, you're welcome to put your questions in the chat and we'll try and come back to them. We will have a 1-hour networking session at the end of the conference so that there's a lot of time for people to be able to contribute. As I mentioned, a year ago, we had our first National Landscape Restoration Scaling Conference, which brought together a range of actors that are committed to advancing restoration in the country. A year later, we come together in this conference and the webinars and the sessions leading up to this to be able to reflect on progress that has been made, to bring stakeholders together and agree on key actions to support implementation of the Forest and Landscape Restoration Implementation Plan, as well as the other presidential directives that have recently come into play that we'll hear more about, to discuss incentives and avenues for resource mobilization, and this was covered in a pre-conference webinar, to explore the role of existing practices and approaches, to showcase models to enhance inclusion, and to bring us all together to celebrate the achievements and discuss what needs to come next. So to open the conference, we're very delighted to invite Mr. Alfred Gishu, who heads the Directorate of Forest Conservation and is the National REDD+ Coordinator and focal point at the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And he'll be opening on behalf of the Cabinet Secretary, the Honourable Cabinet Secretary, today. So Alfred, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, and distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm stepping in for the Cabinet Secretary, who is not able to join us at this time, as she has to attend to another urgent assignment. But I'm privileged then to share her remarks with you this morning. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the remarks from the Cabinet Secretary. I feel honored to join you today as I officially launch this conference to showcase progress made since the 2021 Landscape Restoration Conference in achieving agreed action plans and the creation of a restoration movement. This conference brings together stakeholders across landscapes to agree on key actions to support the implementation of agreed restoration actions. We need to do everything as a country possible to catalyze a national movement to achieve landscape restoration ambitions for Kenya. Let me take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this conference with the able leadership of INCRAF and other partners. With more than 90% of Kenya's landscape facing some form of degradation, and about 61% and 27% facing high and severe degradation respectively, their rehabilitation and restoration requires urgency. We must seize every available opportunity in this country to implement strategies to address the drivers of land degradation, including deforestation and forest degradation, soil and water erosion, climate change, and biodiversity losses. Increasing tree cover and addressing land degradation is the foundation for the success of other productive sectors, such as agriculture, tourism, manufacturing, and energy. Let us therefore, as stakeholders, do the right thing. Landscape restoration, as we speak about it today, is also important for this country to realize a number of global commitments to which we have subscribed. And this includes our commitment to restore 5.1 million hectares of degraded landscapes by 2030, our nationally determined commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement, our commitments on conservation of biodiversity to restore 15% of degraded lands. We also have commitments to restore 350 million hectares of forest globally by 2030. And we also have today a presidential directive that requires that we achieve and maintain a minimum national tree cover of 30% by 2032. And in this regard, there are deliberate government efforts towards restoration of deforested and degraded landscape with the aim of reducing poverty, improving food security, and addressing climate change and biodiversity losses. As part of these noble government efforts, we commit to achieve and maintain 30% tree cover by 2032, in line with the presidential directive, and also a request by the global community to enhance our vision with regard to climate actions, biodiversity conservation, and land restoration. A national strategy is under preparation to provide for the required broad stakeholder participation and shared responsibility. The strategy that is under preparation will focus on the following key areas. And the first one is to plant, nurture, and grow 15.6 billion trees. We will propose to protect and conserve our forests, rehabilitate all degraded forests across the country, develop commercial forest plantations, promote agroforestry and urban tree planting, and restore degraded landscapes in the arid and semi-arid lands. This program will embrace a whole of government and whole of society approach. We will therefore work with national government ministries and agencies. We will work with the county governments, research, civil society, and private sector organizations, investors, and others that have capacity to contribute towards the achievement of this noble goal. The government also undertakes to provide the enabling policy and environment for the required broad stakeholder participation. This meeting today also provides an excellent opportunity, as I understand, for stakeholders to engage and propose possible incentives for mobilizing additional finance for large-scale restoration efforts, particularly those efforts led by communities, women, youth, and the private sector. It is also an opportunity to explore the role of existing practices and approaches to support the required scaling up of restoration actions and identifying necessary strategic and policy adjustments that may be necessary. As a community, let us all aim at building long-term collaborations and partnerships in both planning and implementation of initiatives. Let us strive to ensure effectiveness of efforts, efficiency in delivery, and equity during implementation. Inclusive participation is now entrenched in our constitution and other policies, and we have a duty to therefore fully address and respect the necessary safeguards. As you join me to officially open this conference, I would like to recognize particularly the efforts of the members of the steering committee, the multi-stakeholder working groups that have been working towards actualizing the actions that we had assigned ourselves last year. I also recognize all experts, community women, and youth voices who have been part of the journey this far. I wish all of you success in your deliberations today and look forward to an outcome that will inform the strategy for the ambitious landscape restoration program for Kenya. With those remarks, it is now my pleasure and honor to declare this conference officially open. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gishu, and we're really delighted to have those words from the Honourable CS, and very ambitious and very promising. And I think a lot of people have highlighted that where there is political will and support for these movements, that a lot more can be achieved. So we're really delighted to have you open and to set those high ambitions and objectives. So thank you. As we move into the program, I would like to take a moment just to introduce myself and to share some feedback that we had from earlier this week when we had another workshop in person here at C4ICRAF to look at landscape restoration in the country. So my name is Mika Bono Chieng. I'm based at C4ICRAF in Nairobi, and I manage a program called Regreening Africa. It's been working for 5 years in the country and across 8 different countries. And we have a few lessons and experiences from our current workshop that just took place this week that we want to share with the rest of this group before we go into the rest of the program. As Alfred has very, very ably outlined, land degradation is a serious issue that is really affecting agricultural land and other land uses in the country. And we know that restoring these landscapes whether they be forest, agricultural, or rangelands, leads to multiple benefits. It improves our soil and our fertility, which increases our agricultural productivity. It provides ecosystem services. It increases our vegetation cover, which has an impact on our climate. It creates jobs. It creates tree-based value chains, increases biodiversity, and enhances the food security and nutrition. We also know that it's incredibly important to restore our landscapes for both climate change mitigation and adaptation so that we're more resilient. As I mentioned, Regreening Africa has been working for 5 years in Kenya and 7 other countries across sub-Saharan Africa. It's also an ambitious program that's aimed to restore 1 million hectares of land by integrating trees into different land uses, combined with soil and water conservation, a focus on value chains and policy. The program has been implemented by a range of NGOs, with World Vision leading in Kenya and spearheaded by a consortium that is led by C4ICRAF. The program has been quite successful in achieving its goals and demonstrating that this large-scale landscape restoration is possible. We've already reached out to over 500,000 households and over 850,000 hectares, with 50,000 households and 150,000 hectares in Kenya, with relatively modest resources. So this is to demonstrate that this scaling is possible and that we should take lessons from the past. Regreening Africa is one of these examples, but there are many other examples that we can draw from. In this workshop that we had earlier this week to disseminate the results and to discuss how this can feed into future restoration, we discussed disincentives for restoration, incentives, and some of the key actions, which I'd like to share with you. The disincentives included inadequate resources, both in terms of capacity and financial. The ongoing droughts have also been a disincentive, with many of the efforts not bearing fruit, trees not surviving, and different parts of rangeland restoration going backwards. People felt that ignoring local knowledge was also a disincentive, and that some of the practices have a low adoption rate, or areas that have been restored are then degraded. The time needed to see returns, land tenure and some cultural beliefs, tree planting as a PR exercise, and pests and diseases were all considered to be disincentives, or things that make people not want to restore the land. But there are also very many incentives, a focus on livelihoods, on markets and economic empowerment, political support and international commitments, as we've just heard outlined in the opening remarks, an enabling policy framework which is being developed within the country, the capacity that does exist, and the availability of inputs, a deep need to address climate change and the challenges that we face in the environment is driving many people to restore their lands, as well as these holistic benefits that I outlined earlier, such as increased productivity. People felt that participation and social cohesion was high, and that there is some funding available to support this work. And we'll hear more about some of those examples later on in the session. So some of the key ingredients and some of the actions that were considered necessary by this group that met earlier this week, that we can continue to build on throughout the conference, is about building the capacity of community-based organizations and the community to continue this work and sustain the efforts, to increase awareness at the local level, combined with tree planting, so that community sensitization and awareness raising is a key aspect of any of our efforts, to work with local leaders, a focus on livelihoods again, to integrate science and research and make sure that it is disseminated in an approachable and accessible way, policy to cascade from the national to the county levels, and to devolve resources to match where the devolved functions lie, aligning to the county planning processes, coordination and access to information. There were ideas around green letters of commitment by politicians and ranking of NGOs based on their commitment to these different green ambitions, adapting practices and species to local context. So these were some ideas from a range of stakeholders in the country, and I look forward to adding in the chat box as you introduce yourself other ideas that you have for key ingredients and actions to bring about restoration. From Regreening Africa, we have a few examples on some of these key areas that were highlighted that I'd like to share. We all know that practices are varied and must match both present and future local contexts. That means that there is no one one answer in every single landscape. And as Mr. Gishu outlined, there are different types of objectives within this broader strategy that apply to different land uses. We must match these practices to local needs as well as environmental conditions, taking into account that these environmental conditions could change in the future with climate change. We know we need good quality nurseries with indigenous trees as part of the makeup. We know that we have moved beyond tree planting to tree growing, to also incorporate grafting to improve the quality, and identifying other opportunities like direct seeding, and ensuring that these trees that we plant and graft continue to grow and are protected and have benefits for the community. Farmer managed natural regeneration or assisted natural regeneration in communal areas is one of the low cost, easy to scale options, and particularly in drier areas where seedling survival rates are very low. FMNR can be a very good option to bring into the restoration mix. I've heard a lot about soil and water conservation and the need to focus on that in collaboration. And also, while Regreening Africa did not focus in the rangelands as much, there are different options that need to be considered to restore perennial grasses and to work on rangeland management. As we've heard from the workshop, livelihoods and value chains are at the center of this work. There are many different livelihoods and value chains that have been identified that beyond the agricultural productivity that is enhanced are critical for ensuring that restoration is incentivized and provides livelihoods to the community. And the last area I'd like to touch on is how we integrate science and evidence to magnify impact. There is many different organizations collecting data that we can bring into our discussions so that we understand who's taking up the practices, the livelihood benefits, and who in the household is benefiting from this restoration. We can combine that with land health information so we understand how we can target interventions and track their impact over time using very good quality mapping technologies that exist in the country. Within Regreening Africa, we developed the Regreening Africa app so we can have polygons of the areas that are being restored so that we can track them over time, see the level of improvement, and understand both the species, the reason for the trees being planted or grown, and also we'd like to add other modules in the future to look at rangelands and other dimensions. And we need structured processes that bring evidence and data and information from local perspectives, from research, from government, from NGOs together and to integrate it within the development process, within the planning process, and within the policy process. And there are examples that exist within Kenya of that. And my very last slide is just to highlight partnerships and inclusion. The youth make up the majority of our population, and we need to make sure that they are part of the discussion and the process. Also a focus on women integration and on other groups and communities. It will take all of us to restore the land within the country. There's political momentum, there's momentum of all the people on the call, and we look forward to working with all of you to support this effort. So it's now my great honor to introduce Meseret Shiferau, who's the AFR 100, so that's the African Forest and Landscape Restoration Initiative 100 Regional Coordinator for East and Southern Africa, to share with us a regional and global perspective on restoration. Meseret, I'm handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Meike, and I would like to say welcome to the Kenya National Landscape Restoration Scaling Conference 2022. So I'm here on behalf of Mamadou, who is leading AFR 100 at Nepal level. So with this, I would like also to thank Mr. Alfred to his opening remark and indicating the political commitment from the government of Kenya, which is a key factor in moving the restoration forward. So with this, I would like to give you some highlights on what we are doing at the AFR 100 level, focusing on the progress and focus areas. As you know, as Meike was mentioning, and Mr. Alfred has also indicated in his opening speech, overuse and inefficient practices have led Africa to becoming the most degraded continent on Earth, and more than 65% of sub-Saharan Africans' arable land is becoming too damaged to support robust food production, which most of our communities are dependent on. And also, more than 28% of all land in sub-Saharan Africa are being actively degraded today, which costs us an estimated amount of $56 billion annually. Based on the assessments then, Africa has more than 750 million hectares of land, which is suitable for restoration, which is the largest opportunity in the world, as we all know, which is recorded in different countries across Africa. AFR 100, the reason why I didn't go into the details about the AFR 100 is because we all are aware of the AFR 100, because it's a commitment of the African countries to restore 100 million hectares by 2030. And now the number of countries are 32, and the commitment has reached 128 million hectares. There was a phase one, which ended in 2021, from 2026 to 2021, where AFR 100 has been focusing on 3 areas. The first one is cultivating a political will, lobbying countries to pledge and prioritize restoration activities in countries, and now the countries have reached 32. Also working with countries to build enabling conditions for restoration, like at least 15 countries have mapped and designated priority areas to restore those who have the areas which are really degraded and damaged. 10 countries have national restoration strategies and budgets for that, and 6 countries have set baselines and monitoring for priority landscapes, which is really a very key component to track the progress made. The third area is on catalyzing implementation. Countries have reported more than 5 million hectares have been restored, and more than 3,000 entrepreneurs have been engaged and applied to the different initiatives that AFR 100 in collaboration with WRI and others are doing, like, for example, Land Accelerator, Terra-March, and those kind of things, where the entrepreneurs and community representatives will receive training, capacity building, and also some funds for their activities. In addition to this, especially the entrepreneurs and the community projects are really demonstrating the potential for locally led models of restoration, which the number are increasing from year to year across the countries. As we see from the Land Accelerator, also the number of entrepreneurs who are really active in this program are very high from Kenya as compared to other countries. Now we are entering into the second phase as of November 2022 for the coming 4 years to 2026. In this phase, the focus will be in investing in locally led restoration to bring the implementation, accelerating agroforestry, mangroves, smallholder timber market, and others. So the focus again will be on mobilization of finance through alignment with funders, seeking adaptation and mitigation of other conventions like UNCCD, CBD, and others. So AFR 100 is aligning with the international commitment and commitment of different countries to different initiatives, so that we approach them in harmonized way and address the challenges of the land degradation that's posing a threat to the community. In this phase, AFR 100 delivers the missing pieces which we have seen in phase one. The first one is deepening national ownership, which also the maker was also mentioning. This is really very important to have a national ownership and engagement of stakeholders at national level. And this one, we are all working strongly to have the national forest and the landscape restoration platform, or to strengthen those already existing working groups in different countries. For this, we'll do on technical assistance and financing needs of the governments, and also provide training. We also do policy accelerator programs, which when we bring different government entities together to discuss the policy challenges. Also, the financing is very important. We continue to support the Land Accelerator Program, which is also led by WRI, the AFR Risk Mitigation Facility, Investment Facility, and especially the TerraMatch, which is really providing finance for community-based restoration initiative. The other big focus will be on monitoring progress, which is a big factor. So we use Restoration Watch, Monitoring Accelerator, which also WRS and others are also involved in, and AFR 100 is established a monitoring working group where different partners will come together in resolving and providing recommendation out on how to monitor the progress so far made by countries as per the place for the AFR 100. Specifically in Kenya, in collaboration with partners like Partnership for Forest, we are working to support private sector engagement, which are very key for restoration activities, because as Meike was also mentioning, we have to attach with the source of livelihood, value chain, and income to the people. So the private sector engagement is very important. So we are working to mapping the private sector and financial institutions, organizing roundtable discussions where potential policy issues, financial issues will be discussed, and also we do a funding strategy for different countries. The other big thing here is streamlining coordination. It's very important. A lot of stakeholders are active in different countries, but when we see in some of the cases, the coordination is a bit weak. So we try to bring together the stakeholders to support each other, to learn from each other, and also to report on what's happening in different parts of the country so that the countries will report to their place. The other thing is knowledge management and reporting. And here we will focus on compiling best practices in different countries and share with partners and with different countries, and also support the South-South exchange between different countries so that they learn from each other in best practices and adopt in areas where it is relevant. So in short, these are the main areas we are actively working on. And thank you very much for your listening, and I'm available to reply to any question you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Meseret, and thank you so much for sharing. I think AFR 100 provides a great platform both for these commitments and also for support for the countries and cross-learning in terms of restoration on the continent. I would like to give us a few moments in case there are any questions for the presentation so far. So if there are, you're welcome to raise your hand or to put something in the chat. So far, I'm seeing mostly introductions. It's wonderful to see everybody online, but I'd like to give a moment in case there are any questions. If you are in the participant, you can raise your hand or to put a question in the chat, and we can always come back to that later. I see one in the Q&A. One question in the Q&A was around how we regreen Africa collaboratively, and how do we cooperate with other African countries. Meseret, if you just want to reiterate how the AFR 100 is bringing around cooperation between the countries and this cross-learning, I'd like to invite you to respond to that question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, as I was trying to mention in my presentation, not only between countries and at country level, coordination is a key for successful restoration of forest and landscape. So for country level, we are trying to strengthen the existing working groups in different names on different countries so that they'll plan together and support the countries and the government in achieving the place amount. For between countries, we will the first one will work on organizing annual meetings where especially the people will come together, the focal person for AFR 100 will come together and learn from each other in line with the progress, the challenges, and others. Above all, we'll focus on working, compiling best practices from different countries so that can be shared for landscape in different countries. For example, from Kenya, best practice from Kenya will be shared with best other countries like Nigeria or Ethiopia or Tanzania. For that, we are working on those best practices, and we are trying to also find a way on how to organize South-South exchange between different countries to visit and see the progress made in terms of forest and the landscape restoration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with that, I think there are some more questions coming into the Q&A, and we'll come back to them after the next session. For the next session, I would like to come over to Laura Mukwana to lead the discussion. We've been having a number of pre-conference webinars as well as action groups, and these groups will now share their updates. So Laura, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mika. My name is, like Mika said, my name is Laura Mukwana, and I work with Regreening Africa program. And I've been specifically helping to coordinate the restoration movement, specifically the action groups that are going to present on the work that they've been doing. So I think what I can start with is providing with a brief timeline on what has happened. A brief timeline on what has been happening. So last year, as Mika said, we had the scaling conference, and we came together and decided that instead of just having a conference and making recommendations and making action plans, it's important to form these groups that are going to take the conversation forward, that are going to implement these plans, that are going to continue the conversation with regards to the recommendations. And so we formed 6 action groups. We formed an action group on youth and women involvement in restoration. And these action groups were in line with the conference themes. So we had another one on agricultural landscape restoration, another one on rangeland restoration, faith-based restoration, and also another one on training and capacity building for landscape restoration. The others that are formed were forest and landscape restoration action group, and another on a technical working group on restoration monitoring. So the groups have been meeting for about a year now, several meetings, they've been having various activities, and this session is just going to showcase some of the things that they've been doing. So in the run-up to this conference, we had a series of webinars, 4 in total, and they focused on the various themes of the conference, which are basically on faith-based restoration, restoration practices and monitoring, and youth and women inclusion. And they were responding to the recommendations that were made. Like, for example, the first webinar that we had on finance options was in response to the recommendation and the conversation we had in the previous conference of youth, women not being able to access funding. So this webinar was just trying to showcase what are these options that are available to youth, to women, to faith actors when it comes to them accessing funding. So we looked at grants, we looked at various business models that they can use. We also introduced them to the whole concept of climate finance, which is an emerging trend, because we felt that they needed to understand such kind of things. So we had over 290 participants during that conference, during that webinar. Then we moved on to accelerating restoration action through youth and women, and we also included children. And this is because during the last conference, it was youth and women and children were kind of recognized to be important to this movement, to now moving restoration forward, to scaling restoration. So that we had on the 26th of October, and it aimed to now showcase what are those models that are working on the ground when it comes to youth and women and children inclusion in restoration. During the last conference, the Chief Administrative Secretary from the Ministry of Agriculture, Ms. Anyaga, mentioned that we also need to include children to ensure the sustainability of these efforts. So we looked at what are those models models that are working. What are those challenges that actors experience when they're engaging with youth, with women, and with children when in restoration? What are the lessons that we can learn from this? And we also had a webinar on the power of faith-based approaches in land restoration. And during the conference, it was quite clear that a faith-based approach is very important because in the words of the late Reverend Beatty, who said that Africa, especially in Africa, Africans are notoriously religious and religion permeates into all aspects of their lives. So during the conference, the things that are coming out is that faith-based actors have various avenues to promote restoration. They have the structures, they have schools, they have media stations, they have radio stations, TV, they have institutions. So they have avenues. So this webinar was just delving deep into that. It showcased what faith actors are actually doing on the ground, which is quite unique because that doesn't usually come to the forefront of such discussions. It showcased what they were doing. We had representatives from the Muslim community, from the Hindu community, from various factions of the Christian community, showcasing the work that they're doing, showcasing the challenges that they face when they're engaging in restoration, and kind of the support that they require to scale up the activities. And the last webinar we had was on restoring Kenya's rangelands, the way forward. Rangelands are an important topic because when you talk about restoration, a lot of people think about trees and forests, but rangelands often get left out. So this webinar just tried to showcase the work of the action group, which kind of highlighted several key issues that are important for rangeland restoration, and just trying to look at what needs to be done to address this key issue. So this is what this webinar is about. And right now, we're just going to move on to the various thematic presentations. And we're going to start with we're going to start with the rangelands presentation, and they're going to show us what they're going to do. After that, we're going to move to faith-based, then agriculture and youth. So I'd like to welcome Amina Malim to take on the rangelands, and Petronila Nduzo. Over to you, Amina.
Thank you, Laura. Kindly pull up the presentation. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm going to mute my video so that I can have internet for me. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'll be taking you, myself and Dr. Petronila from State Department of Livestock will be presenting this session, and will be supported by Dr. Hans-Peter Lineger from WOCAT, and Lucy Wairungu and Schaffner, and also Stanley and Blaise Okinyi. Next slide, please. And we present our presentation will have a slide which will talk briefly on the background and on the key issues that have been identified on the rangeland topic. And so far we have already 6 topics that we've identified, which is the first one would be on policies. How do we support national and county policies, commitments, targets, and plans in advancing rangeland restoration, and also documentation and sharing of experiences and knowledges on good rangeland management practices and what are their impacts, and also how do we assess and monitor rangeland health for their multiple targets and commitments, like the land degradation neutrality, UN decade on ecosystem restoration, and also on IYRP. And the fourth one will be exploring the role of the youth, women, and to see how do we strengthen their involvement and capacity to ensure we have success in restoration of the rangelands. And the fifth one would be looking at the current and future threat by the invasive, both alien and the native invasive species, and how do we address them? And also we look at how do we enhance resilience to the changing climate. We've had this action group. We've had this action group, and I'm really happy that it's been a very active one on the various thematic themes that we've had, which we have had a purpose of identifying and prioritizing the key issues that will support the restoration and conservation of the Kenyan rangelands. And we've also managed to share experiences and opportunities, identify the solution, the bottlenecks, and how do we overcome those issues. And so far, we've managed to achieve and identify 11 key issues, and we've addressed 8 of those 11 issues. And we've had a series of webinars and also meetings where we've also organized the Restoring Kenya's Rangelands, which we have identified the way forward, which we did the last webinar on 17th of November. 17th of November 2022, where we've had over 200 participants, and we were really happy. And these are our main support, the main institutions that are supporting our rangeland restoration action group. So the key issues that we've identified to be influencing the rangeland restoration, as they have been prioritized by our action group, has been the first one, the documentation and sharing of experiences and knowledges on good restoration rangeland management practices, not only the practice itself, but what impact is it making. And also we need to assess and monitor rangeland health for the multiple targets, and also enhance resilience to the changing climate, the markets, and the interests, and also need to identify what are the drivers. We need to identify and address the drivers of this rangeland degradation, and how do we achieve large-scale restoration at different levels. But at this, for us, the focus has been at the landscape level at the moment. And also we were exploring the role of the youth and women, and how do we strengthen their involvement and capacity. And we looked at also the current and future threats by invasive species, and the various methods of addressing them or technologies to address them. And looking at now the policies, how do we support national and county policies and in advancing rangeland restoration, and support them in meeting the different targets they have at the national level, at the county level, and towards meeting the global and national commitments to restoration. And the viability of carbon credit schemes, renewable energy options, tourism, biodiversity conservation as alternative livelihood sources to livestock production, and also the need to identify and explore financial mechanisms for rangeland restoration, and also the engagement of private sector in restoration and conservation activities. I would like Dr. Petronella to take over the next 3 slides, and then I'll be back to continue.
Yeah, thank you so much, Madam Amina, for those preliminary slides. At this point, I want to take us through what you were able to do as members of the action group. I come from the State Department of Livestock in the Range Resource Development Division. In this division, that is where we deal with most issues on range management. So I want to give a bit of the background, and we find that most of our country is rangelands. That is at 89% cover of our country. Most of this area, that is the rangelands, supports about 70% of livestock. That is the cows, the cattle, the camels, the goats, and the sheep. They come from this region. And that is why you see that due to that production from some of these rangelands, they contribute to about 12% of our gross domestic productivity. Apart from that, we also find that our rangelands are important because they also have about 85% of our wildlife in the country. Our rangelands are not only used for livestock keeping, but we also find that they provide a livelihood to most of about 10 million of the people in this country. And due to that and the way the rangelands are being used, it has been faced by several challenges, and most of it is the degradation of those rangelands. And due to those degradation, we find that the productivity has been affected. The other challenges that are also facing our rangelands are high level are high levels of soil and land degradation and biodiversity loss.
Thank you. Yeah, our next slide is about the key challenges that were faced. I said that as a Reg Resource Development Division, we were part of this action group that was presenting what we've been able to do in the rangeland restoration. And some of the key challenges are low technical capacity and awareness on restoration among county directors, stock officials, and administrators. We also find that there was awareness of low-cost restoration approaches suitable for rangelands due to the misconception that restoration is tree planting and results of the political goodwill for restoration. The other challenge that is faced during the restoration is lack of county spatial land use plans. People need to understand where the degradation is. So when we don't have these plans, you find that they don't know where to go and do the restoration. And even where we have these plans, you find that there is no enforcement, and that one affects the restoration. Another challenge that is faced during the restoration of the rangelands is limited funding at both county and national level. And the problem comes because we cannot be able to disseminate some of these policies that are developed at national level, and also the strategies that are developed at the county level. This also results because at times you have very few copies to distribute to the whole country because of the issue of printing so many copies. The other challenge that is faced under the limited funding is issue about implementing rangeland restoration initiatives. You already know what you need to do, but you don't have the funds to go and do whatever you need to do. There is also lack of proper financing mechanism, especially for trust lands that are held in trust for the communities by the county government and the communal lands. The other challenge that is faced is lack of adoption of rangeland management, stock restoration policies, plans, and strategies. And this at times happens because the people who need to implement have not been sensitized enough. We know that extension has been affected because the number of staff have been thinning over time in the county government and also at the national level. So you find that most of these messages that needs to reach the implementers don't get there. There is also lack of synergy among stakeholders. So we find that there are so many stakeholders who are doing some restoration on the ground, but they don't know what each is doing. So you might find that people might even be going to the same area to do the same restoration. So there is need for the stakeholders to work together. The way forward, we find that actors should use a variety of approaches to support the integration of rangeland restoration into the county and national level policy plans to target. So in this one, during our discussion as members of the rangeland restoration action group, we found that there should be support of development of national rangeland management and restoration policies, plans, and strategies. We know that at this point as Range Management Division, some strategies have been developed, strategy like the range management and pastoralism strategy. We also find that some plans that have been developed like range management plan, and there's also the feed route guideline. So at the same time, we need to come up with the local community institutions. This one should be set up and strengthened. And some of these institutions that we are talking about are community forest associations, the water users associations, the beat management units, and village natural resource and land use committees. These are very important when it comes to the restoration because they will also help in giving the information to the other implementers. There is also a need to implement large-scale rangeland restoration projects And in this case, like in our State Department of Livestock, we have towards ending the drought emergencies. And this project's main objective is the restoration of the rangelands. And by the end of it, they want to restore something like 500,000 hectares. There is also need to involve all the stakeholders that we have both at the national and the county level governments. And this can only be done if people work together and coordinate well. There is also creating awareness of the need for rangeland restoration at county level along with capacity building on suitable restoration approaches, which is vital to creating political goodwill to enable smooth implementation of restoration of approaches. At this point, I want to usher in Madam Amina. Next slide, please. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Petronella, for the very informative presentation of the session on national policies. And the second topic on knowledge management and documentation and sharing. And the key challenges has been like knowledge is still a gap, as well as it is an enabling factor for the uptake and spread of this sustainable rangeland management. There is need to embrace both scientific and indigenous knowledge and documentation of both to enhance restoration of the rangelands. And also, it is not sufficiently made available. As much as it is known, it is not available. And many organizations have their own system for documenting and monitoring, yet at various levels of comprehensiveness, and it's not standardized. They're mostly used for internal reporting and presentation and case studies. Different stakeholders need different levels of knowledge for their own needs, and that is not available. Access to this knowledge is also difficult, and there is no, it's not open access. Mostly are internal, and clearly less is available for rangelands as compared to croplands. Continuity also is not secured. You see gaps in different, a stakeholder uses a specific, has a specific amount of knowledge available and uses it for that, but the gaps identified are not addressed in the following what do you call activity. And updating is not also systematic. People use it and leave it, and they don't put it up for others to use. For the way forward, the results from our action group survey has indicated that there is a need for a joint action group for documenting and sharing in order to advance rangeland. There is a very big need for that, for rangeland restoration. And how do we do this? We need to have MOUs for the involvement of researchers and community of practice, and also have more evidence on impact and need for generous and specific budget line and dedicated persons with allocation of time. There is need to have people who are dedicated to do this, and so that they can be able to have a budget and document those technologies and share the knowledges and experiences so that we can have more impact on the ground. And also there is need for capacity to document for M&E documentation, and also coordination of coordinating organization that will be able to assist and follow up with the different projects and experienced practitioners. And on the right side here, we have a book by our very own Hans-Peter Lineker, who has done on sustainable rangeland management in sub-Saharan Africa, which is a guideline to the good practices which he was able to document over the years. And also there is need for having a concrete action plan and funding for this for this documentation of the various experiences and knowledge. What opportunity do we have here? We have WOCAT, which has provided us with, which is a global database on sustainable land management, and has been recommended by the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And it has been an enabler for sharing knowledge on suitable for rangeland documentation. And So far, it has able to document 2,228 sustainable land management practices from 134 countries, and has been used by 445 users. And the technologies that it has documented are 1,276 sustainable land management technologies, with 503 sustainable land management approaches. And it already has 442 UNCCD praise practices. And over the past 90 days, we've been able to document draft 30 new practices, and 85,000 visits have been noticed by the users to be the users of the sites from different 197 different countries since the launch in 2016, in August 2016. And that is the good work Hans-Peter and his team are doing. And this has been used for multiple purposes to highlight the importance of rangelands in terms of reporting for land degradation neutrality, and also towards the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists 2026, and also the reporting on the initiation of Restoration Decade and climate change and adaptation mitigation experiences, and also on disaster risk reduction, and also a gender module. And this has been recommended by the UNCCD. And also in terms of monitoring and assessing rangeland health for the multiple targets and commitments, we've had a very good indicator for monitoring, which is biomonitoring, which is monitoring like nutrient cycle, water cycle, plant community dynamics. And so far we've seen the challenges and limitation to be having these false positives like the desert flower and irrigation fields, and areas that have been reported to be invaded by these invasive species to be reported as greening sites, which are not. And also selection of sites for monitoring. What are the representative sites for the various land uses and land cover types? And the vastness of the rangelands makes it difficult to get the ground truth data. And what is the way forward? We need to have a sustainability index for the landscape restoration, which is tailored to specific sites to measure restoration on ecological aspects of rangeland, but also the social aspects of rangeland. And also a simple monitoring tool, to use simple monitoring tools that allow monitoring of complex ecosystems, and also a monitoring, platform framework, or a framework to share rangeland health monitoring data between institutions. So, and also on the management of invasive species, we need to have the current and future threats of invasive species and how do we address them. And so far the control mechanisms, we've seen the biological, the chemical, mechanical, cultural, and a combination of all those. And the key messages that were identified by this action group, the experts, have been like many non-native plant species have been deliberately introduced because they can also provide some benefits. However, if they become invasive and have negative effects on nature and human well-being, the negative effects sooner or later outweigh the positive ones. And the management of invasive species should consider both the spatial and temporal aspects of the invasion. But the spatial planning of the management, as much as it is critical, it needs coordination among multiple stakeholders, institutions, and actors. And the integration of different management options has achieved the best results worldwide, even in Africa. And the biological control is a key component of management of widely distributed invasive alien species. And an example, we have the Woody Weed Project, which helps implementing the National Prosopis Strategy. And the last one, which is on the exploring the role of the youth and women and how to strengthen their involvement and capacity. The key messages has been like, there are many youth-led organizations that are engaged in restorations, and the numbers are increasing. And to enhance the sustainability of their restoration work, they're establishing tree and fruit tree nurseries, which are managed by young women and men. And also they're using social media presence and making available more picnic conversations by the youth. And the youth are very innovative, but they're lacking the platforms which they can share their ideas. And we have had two very good platforms, which was Marifa Corner, which was a local, which was done in Garissa, supported by USAID. And it was looking for local solutions for local problems. And also the Land Accelerator Program, which was by the AFR 100, which has supported over 500 youth in Africa and has been providing fine of $7,000 as a financial incentive to boost the application for the projects that make impact in the community, and also giving them $10,000 to finish their projects and create impact in the community. And also the areas to be restored are vast, but have limitations in terms of capacity, funding, and also human resources. They have had great stories, the different organizations, youth-led organizations. They've had very great success stories. They have planted over thousands of trees in the rangelands, but the changing climate in terms of the recurrent droughts and reliable rainfall patterns have been a challenge to their restoration projects. There is need to engage the private sector investment, as well as enhancing their financial access to the young women and men. And what is the way forward? We need to increase funding that targets the youth, and the youth organizations, and help build their capacity, and partnership formation with the youth, and also enhance their exposure and help them take part in international, county, national, and also international exposure. So how do we enhance resilience to the changing climate? The key actions and required is we should not use climate change as a scapegoat for disaster and for losing productivity and resilience. Resilience to extremes, we need we have heavy storms and we have droughts, and then we've been monitoring rainfalls, rainwater, and groundwater recharge. We have long-term data and proper analysis of change. This is the work that is being done by Hans Peter. The availability of...
Thank you so much. So I'll invite Alan, Chana, and Katha to do the next presentation on behalf of the Faith-Based Action Group. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be joining this national conference again, as like last year. My name is Alan Chana, and I'm with the Global Evergreening Alliance, Oiko Diplomatique, occasionally with the ICRAF as well, where I focus on the links between land restoration and with peace building. So we're going to share about this faith-based action group. And I was just struck to mention that Laura, she quoted the Reverend John Mbiti, and I was looking him up and discovered that he is often called the father of modern African theology. And I discovered that he's late now, but he was actually a friend of the mentor of our action group, is Reverend Dr. Sam Kobia, who I'm sure many of you will know, and I'm pleased to have been mentored by him and to be working in our faith-based group. Our team is Nkatha Kobia, who is the daughter of Reverend Kobia. So we'll be the ones presenting this and to share the purpose of it, which is how faith-based institutions and communities can contribute to scaling up restoration in Kenya. And so how capacity of faith communities to advocate and to implement land restoration can be done. And we've been doing that so far through different workshops and webinars. So here, it's quite an interesting diagram which explains how the faith-based group has evolved. And if you see on the left, there was a pioneering workshop at ICRAF in 2017. This was a vision of several people that came together. Dr. Dennis Garrity, who was the former Director General of ICRAF, and his friendships, Reverend Kobia. We came together with quite a few religious leaders from SUPKEM, from the Anglicans, from the Catholics. There was the retired Archbishop Nzimbi. Very interesting mix. And it was very interesting that it was ICRAF inviting faith leaders onto the campus to share and discuss and brainstorm as to where and how faith communities could help scale up and help the ICRAFs of this world actually deliver, scaling amongst the communities. It's quite interesting to see that it was 4 years later that last year at this National Landscape Restoration Scaling Conference that these ideas were kind of taken up, and it was one of the streams. And it's interesting how it was this conference which then springboarded the acceleration of the whole thing, because an action group was formed out of last year's conference, and then there was a workshop at the AACC, and from there action plans were developed, and things started to snowball with different webinars, trainings, and so forth. And Kartha will share more about what was been coming out of those. So this is just to show some of the key learnings that we've been discovering. Just to quickly go through, one thing is that it's very much about working with diversity, which is very interesting because faith groups are just obviously very, very diverse. Of course, in the theology, in the beliefs, but also in the types of networks that they have, and also, of course, even in their resource endowments. You can have some small churches somewhere, you can have a big, quite wealthy. So one of the things for the scientific community and even the NGO community is to be very, very aware when we talk about working with faith-based communities, we're talking about very, very diverse and a lot of learning and sensitivity to understand and to be invited into those kind of partnerships. We also found that faith communities can really help building the multi-stakeholder partnerships because so many different actors may be coming to the congregations. If a bishop is excited about faith-based restoration, he can be talking to somebody who's in the value chain, somebody who may be even a politician, and they can encourage the whole process to move forward. And so from the pulpit, that's a strong basis for advocacy, stewarding this creation that God has given us. And how do we do that? How do we take responsibility? What understanding can we have to go out and do that amongst the community? That's a very powerful way of doing that. And then, of course, we discovered also, and people share, we have land. It's very interesting how much land the faith institutions hold. And on the coast, we were hearing from the Muslim communities there about the land that they have and the restoration potential that's possible there. And also we were discovering that there's so much learning. Faith communities asking, which tree in which area, for what purpose, but also NGO and scientific communities having not actually worked closely with faith communities before. Of course, some have. But so there's so much of learning that can be taking place. And then but who is actually, which institutions are fostering this intersectoral approach? Because it's not for the ICRAFs to necessarily always be inviting, the subchems and the Catholic bishops to the campus in ICRAF, or it's not for maybe some ADRA, Seventh-day Adventists, are not necessarily going to be working necessarily very closely with the subchems. So how is this all being kind of nurtured is another area that we threw up as something to be looked at. And Diplomatique, which was the NGO founded by Reverend Kobia, who was former General Secretary of the World Council of Churches and had done a lot of interfaith work as well, has the understanding and the connections, and it's a privileged thing really that we've been able to partner with them. So just to say that we've developed this action plan, and it came out of the workshop at AACC with a call to action for faith communities. There was this strong desire to see success stories and testimonials from faith-based restoration initiatives. And that came out in the webinar, which Kartha will tell us more about. Create the visibility for that and the webinars which we've been doing. And then this capacity building. So we really identified that we need to train, faith leaders often need training in land restoration techniques and methodologies. It's not just a bishop coming, watering a tree and then saying, or many trees, or even kids going out and planting trees on a Sunday and then not following through. So how do we develop faith-backed messages and toolkits, and then a training of faith leaders, which has already been taking place with World Vision doing an empowered worldview on FMNR, and partnership building, which we're doing. So I think we're quite excited actually that this is an energy that's coming out. And so I'd like to hand over to my colleague Kartha, who will share in more detail how that's been happening.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Good morning to all the participants, all the presenters, and the organizers. I hope everyone is enjoying the conference so far. This is a great occasion, and it's a very big pleasure to join you all at this very timely conference, this national conference, which is all about scaling land restoration. So, why a faith-based approach? Over 85% of the population is affiliated to a faith or religion, such as Islam, Christianity, Hindu, traditional African religion, and others. Therefore, when you use an approach that is faith-based, for example, using faith institutions, faith leaders, and texts like the Bible, the Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita, you are likely to touch and inspire the core of the person. Land restoration presented based on holy texts becomes an intrinsic duty of the individual and the community because their creator instructs them to preserve and care for the planet, their home. This is therefore a key reason why a faith-based approach to land restoration is necessary and effective. So a faith-based approach has been used since the national conference last year, and I'd like to just outline some of the outcomes and some of the activities that we have seen so far. In today's conference, one of the main aims is to take stock and celebrate the progress thus far of the restoration movements created by the conference last year. The various religions are at the roots of institutions like schools, youth organizations, and developmental organizations. In the case of Islam, the religion is even the base of their financial institutions, such as banks. Therefore, all the constituents of these organizations can be reached with the message of land restoration, which is almost the entire population of the country, if you think about it. They can teach, provide incentives, and coordinate activities around land restoration. As the faith-based subgroup, which originated out of last year's national conference, we have had several activities. Some of the organizations and groups which we heard from at our recent webinar this month has been, for example, the Laudato Si. This is a coalition of Catholics who work together for caring for the planet. We also heard from Sinesa, which is a network of young people working to address climate change and land degradation. They focus on awareness creation and local grassroots action. They presented case studies, including one of a key project in Kirinyaga and Moranga. They really work with communities on the ground, including doing mini demonstrations and activities to practically show people how to grow and nurture seedlings. A key lesson that they taught us is to be willing to work with non-faith-based groups as well. We also heard from SUPKEM. This is the umbrella body of all Muslim organizations, societies, mosques, and groups in the country. Their motivation is from the Quran, which states that we are stewards of creation. They call for sustainable development to avoid overuse of the resources. They explained to us in the webinar that they have been involved, for example, in tree planting in Subukia, as well as many other areas in the country. They conduct cleanup days in different regions. They conduct workshops, they sensitize the public, and teach best practices that they have learned. They also promote innovative ways of encouraging conservation activities, such as tree planting and weddings and funerals. At the webinar, we also learned of the work of the IRCK. This is the Interreligious Community Council of Kenya. They focus on reclaiming and greening the earth. They are a very large coalition bringing together umbrella bodies such as SUPKEM, the Hindu Council, NCCK, among many others. Many of the organizations which within IRCK are also linked to schools. IRCK reported that they focus on sustainable development goals. We heard also from the Minda Trust, which is based at the coast. They focus on preservation of the mangroves and empowerment of women and fishermen by facilitating income-generating activity. Another example of a faith-based organization actively involved in landscape restoration is the Green Anglican. Their experience is that using faith leaders is actually the best approach to land restoration. They grow neem trees, which is known to have over 40 health benefits. They also use an interfaith approach. Eleka Trust, another organization which started in 1995, conducts leadership training and skill development to achieve their vision of coastal communities living in abundance by restoring the land and preserving it. These are just some of the examples of how faith-based actors are actively working towards scaling land restoration in Kenya. In Oekodiplomatique, one of our key activities is providing platforms and forums and spaces for brainstorming strategies for supporting and building the movement of land restoration. We also foster partnerships with relevant actors to address issues and to solve challenges. We have brought together scientists, faith leaders, youth, women, government officials, funding partners, and linked with actors on the ground as well to learn from them and explore areas of further cooperation. For example, Elgeyo Marakwet has been a key area where we partnered with World Vision to train people on an empowered worldview, which is a project conducted by World Vision, which encourages people to explore the resources that they have and that they can use without necessarily going to look for foreign funding in the traditional sense. All these and more took place in the past year. We look forward to continuing and expanding in the coming year and encourage everyone present at this conference to also keep on and keep expanding their initiatives as we move towards a restored and greener and more productive, self-sustaining Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan and Katha, for sharing those great insights. So I'll just like to, before we move on to the next presentations, I'd like to urge our various presenters and speakers to respond to the questions in the chat that have been directed to them. So I'd like to welcome Fiona and Jerry to take us through the next presentation on what the youth and women have been doing. So Fiona, over to you, and you have 5 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fiona and Jerry, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I'll be taking you through youth and women inclusion in restoration action groups. And youths are a powerful stakeholder that needs to be engaged if we are to build a sustainable future, that we are venturing into matters restoration. So overview of the action group, it was launched as one of the 5 thematic action groups following the Kenya National Landscape Restoration Scaling Conference that was held between 9th to 16th of July 2021. It comprises of 59 members with 42 organizations represented, and the action group has held 12 meetings so far. So the purpose of this action group is to implement the actions agreed upon during the Youth and Women Inclusion Restoration session. For example, creating a network to coordinate the youth and women working in restoration, training and capacity building, that is training on fundraising, and to upscale the participation of youth and women in restoration for economic empowerment. So we also have sharing opportunities through the network and mobilize resources for joint action, coordination of different actors to facilitate the participation of youth and women in restoration, to provide members a platform to present their ideas and projects for input on how to expand them and make them more sustainable, and to act as a platform for women or youth in restoration to enhance co-creation with other players. So once we become a credible network, we can co-create projects with actors such as private sector actors or donors to enhance landscape restoration, where they are partners, not only as beneficiaries. So the key achievements is first to showcased women leadership in restoration, such as the Celebrating Women in Restoration webinar and networking session that was held in 22nd March, and social media campaigns also in the same month. We also organized capacity building events for youth and women involved in landscape restoration in Kenya. Training on fundraising and resource mobilization with an average of 100 participants over 3 days, representing 120 organizations. So the participants were trained on principles and techniques of fundraising, proposal writing, grant management, and digital fundraising. We also organized and executed social media campaign to mark Plastic-Free July, titled My Waste, My Responsibility. That was held during the week of 27th July 2022. We also organized 2 pre-conference thematic webinars. So that is finance options for restoration webinar on 11th October, and accelerating restoration through action, youth and women. That was held on 26th October. So the finance option for restoration webinar that was organized by the Youth and Women Action Group, and other audiences included the faith actors and private sector, and the number of attendees were 240. The objectives were to showcase the various finance options available for community-led restoration efforts, and to promote the understanding of emerging finance options such as carbon and climate finance. So the finance option available for youth, women, and faith actors were grand sustainable business models, such as viable green value chains, sustainable finance option that is carbon financing. For the Accelerating Restoration Action Through Youth and Women webinar, the objectives were to showcase the work of the Youth and Women Inclusion in Restoration Action Group and lessons learned from youth, children, and women engagement. So this will involve showcasing models or approaches for youth and women inclusion in restoration efforts. The other objective was to explore opportunities for supporting inclusion of children in restoration efforts, such as creation of environmental clubs, wildlife clubs, 4K clubs, through influencing their curricula and capacity strengthening. This time we need to venture into creation of clubs and simplifying the language for them to understand restoration through coming down to their level, and also to launch the Youth and Women in Restoration Network to launch the capacity strengthening program for the youth, women, and faith actors involved in restoration. So the gaps in support is that youths need to be empowered to understand planning processes and policy documents. We also will have the land tenure system, which has to be strengthened to enhance access and ownership by women and youth. We also have meaningful partnerships in implementing restoration initiatives on the ground with state, local, national, and global partners. They need access to knowledge and technology through capacity building that helps them address real-world challenges. And the financing, including bank loans, must be adjusted to suit the needs and constraints of women and youth. So we have different models that have been used for engagement of youth and women and children. And that is art, that could be skits, plays, and we have sports as well. Training, and also like through what we do is to create football teams and naming them after different tree types or restoration activities. The campaign is called Sports for Nature, where the kids restore nature challenge, and also using beauty pageants, that is the modeling, to keep them interested in conservation modeling. We also have music and formation of environmental clubs. The challenges and opportunities for youth. The challenges is them not being involved in environmental decision making, and they also experience land ownership challenges. So the opportunities that arise from this is youth engagement in restoration and value chain activities are being explored as the opportunities for income creation in nursery establishment activities, for example. We also have the sustainability of many projects, especially restoration and regreening projects. They are highly dependent on innovative ideas that enable projects to stay relevant and adapt with the changing times. So youths can be drivers of innovation. So the lesson learned is, first of all, children participation from idea generation to project implementation promotes ownership of the project. So if you involve them from scratch, they'll be able to see why this is important and how they will stay interested in being involved. We also have group savings enable women groups to flourish in environmental actions. And the other lesson learned is no strategy, no future. Restoration through the young generation is the only way forward for sustainability. As I mentioned earlier, they are key stakeholders in restoration. So sports is also the most natural way of engagement that is yet to be exploited. With purposeful and intentional involvement of children, it thus becomes the most powerful tool for transformation. And that is an underutilized strategy. So the future plans for this action group, transitioning into the Youth Restoration Network, that is, the recruiting is still ongoing and there's continuous mobilization of the same. The other plan is capacity building program that starts in January 2023. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for highlighting that. So we'll move on to Veronica Wanyora from the Council of Governors to give us a summary of the discussions that were held during the first day of the conference yesterday, which focused on forest and landscape integration, restoration integration at county level. Welcome, Veronica.
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, all participants. Welcome to today's session. So yesterday we had a county engagement. We are honored to have His Excellency Governor Nyeri County, who did an opening remarks. And also we had a panel session of 6 county directors who gave us various opportunities in the county that exist on landscape restoration. And afterwards, we have breakaway sessions that we discussed on key areas, different regional areas, that is arid, semi-arid, highlands, and how we can upscale restoration specifically for those areas. So I'll just dive in on breakaway session. The breakaway sessions, they were focusing on the research approaches for each ecosystem types, which I've just mentioned. That is the arid, the arid areas, the coastal regions, and the highlands areas. Also, this session also provided input for support that counties require to achieve restoration in terms of resources, collaborations, and structures. So the outcome of this meeting, this is what were the main takeaways. On other areas, some of the approaches that were suggested is including drought-resistant tree varieties like moringa, measures to control soil erosion, clearing and reseeding with indigenous grass seeds, agroforestry practices, participatory rangeland management, plant grazing, restoration indigenous plants that are disappearing or have disappeared, and in water conservation. When it comes to mid-elevation croplands, some of the approaches that were discussed and agreed upon is using high-value agroforestry tree species. This is working with various stakeholders who their expertise, including carefree, providing specific trees that are specific for those regions, using technologies to monitor restoration efforts, integration of indigenous cropland management practices, integration of silvicultural management practices into tree planting on farms, and using of soil microbes such as fungi, etc. So on highlands water towers, this is what was suggested. Some of the approaches were including participatory forest management plans, nature-based enterprises with economic benefits, tapping into indigenous knowledge systems. And this was alluded earlier by His Excellency that despite us looking also into scientific approaches and practices, we can tap into indigenous knowledge, which is rich with our communities. Also on livestock improvement. Yes, and on coastal zones, this was discussed on adopting agroecology as alternative methods in farms and agroecosystems. There's also issues of blue economy, exploring areas of livelihoods and diversification. Also on upscale restoration of mangrove ecosystems, including establishing woodlots and the mangroves. And also county governments, they were urged to bring together all stakeholders within their jurisdiction for harmonized or collective efforts in restoration. And also form inter-county committees between counties that are share natural resources and also on restoration. This is also provided in the legislative framework we have as a country, that is referring to the County Government Act 2012 and the Constitution of Kenya. So our next discussion was what support do counties require? So as specified also provided by the Constitution of Kenya, the national government are supposed to help counties by providing technical support and capacity building on restoration matters. Also, counties were urged to undertake specific restoration opportunities or ROAM, which was undertaken at the national level, but counties were urged to undertake this assessment that will provide specific opportunities, methodologies, even mapping of various stakeholders within the counties that they can work or leverage on restoration issues. Number 3 on strengthening county monitoring and evaluation. This includes supporting in setting necessary legal frameworks and institutions. We are aware that the county government, they have monitoring and evaluation departments that when these M&E departments are strengthened, they are able to, working with various stakeholders to coordinate other stakeholders, and they are able to harmonize or bring various stakeholders to report and monitor on what on all restorations that are done within the counties. The next point was on strengthening intergovernmental relations between national government and county government. This was key since that the county governments and the national government institutions that work within counties, it is necessary for them to work together. And also this will help that even partners that exist within national and within county, they can come together and work for a collective or a common goal. And also this also will devolve more resources up to the ward level or the most devolved unit at the county level. Leverage also on the CSOs. This was based on a challenge that was highlighted by various counties that there is inadequate resourcing in forestry sector at the county level. And therefore it's important for us for the counties to leverage on various CSOs and community-based organization and various partners for resource mobilization or fundraising for the same. Also strengthen public participation, involving the communities from the initial stages in development of the CIDPs. We are all aware counties are developing the third generation of CIDPs, and it is very important to include the communities, starting with barazas at the grassroots level. You ask them what are their priorities when it comes to restoration. And this needs to be strengthened, public participation, or we use a different approach so that we make sure we maximize so that on this opportunity so that we have that at grassroots, that's where the efforts start. And also there's a need for a platform for knowledge sharing, experience and learning between stakeholders and counties. Currently, the counties, the Council of Governors facilitate peer-to-peer learning or sharing of experiences through Marifa platform that is hosted at the county government, where you can learn the various best practices that are undertaken at the county level. But also at the county level, we need to have such a platform that will enable various stakeholders and the counties to learn from each other. So the next point was on some of the priorities the county governments they have committed to, and this is putting in place conducive legal and policy environment. As we are speaking, various counties already have these policies that is on climate change and on forestry, and others they are still in development. This will go handy establishing various institutions, and they are able to even enforce. It was raised earlier that some of the challenges you are facing is enforcement. So these legal policies, they give them power to undertake such activities. Also is the implementation of the devolved constitutional assigned forestry functions. We are all aware that forestry is a concurrent functions, and the Constitution of Kenya delineates the functions to either the national government and the county government. So it's more of strengthening county government to have in capacity building so that they can implement the various devolved forestry functions. Strengthened intergovernmental consultation and coordination, vertically and horizontally, now between the county government and also between the two levels of government, that is the national and the county level. Also enhanced research and knowledge management in specific restoration gaps and needs identified. So by counties undertaking the ROM, you'll be able to identify various challenges that they are facing them and specific restoration gaps, such as some counties identified like invasive species is one of the barriers for the restoration in the counties. So by accelerating research and also enhancing knowledge management, that will be key. Spatial planning that are well integrated, integrating the forest and land use plans. And finally, strengthen forest sector monitoring, bringing together all the stakeholders together for harmonized and consolidated efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica. We're almost done, but in the next 3 minutes, I'd like to invite Francis Nyambariga to take us through what has been done by the Agricultural Landscape Group. Francis, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ibagendi Nyambariga. I work in the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm a Deputy Director of Land Reclamation. At the moment, I'm also a member of the Agricultural Landscapes Restoration Group. Landscapes Restoration Group or action group was formed out of the recommendations of last year's webinar. And of course, in the last 1 year, we've had a few actions that we've done. And of course, much as we are not perfect or we've not done 100%, but at least I should also mention that this group is quite diverse because Kenya is an agricultural country and agriculture is one of the key degraders of the environment. It also means that the people who are doing maybe agricultural practices also need to look for solutions for the same. Now, to begin with, the purpose of the action group was to document the work that actors in the agricultural landscape restoration are doing, including where they are working, the types and scale of intervention. So we also have another purpose is to coordinate different actors engaged in agricultural landscapes restoration, and also to conduct stakeholder mapping of actors engaged in the restoration of agricultural lands. Then also to identify and map agricultural land degradation hotspots for joint action, and of course to conduct needs assessment for identified degradation hotspot to determine the restoration approaches or techniques, because different areas are affected differently. You'll even find that different degradation processes are taking place across the country. So we need to determine or to identify the degradation hotspots in the first place, and then we also try to find out what is the main cause. So once we diagnose, and then we can also come up with techniques to reverse the degradation. This includes agroforestry, climate smart agriculture, permaculture, regenerative ecological systems, and etc. These ones are required depending on the drivers of the degradation and the requirements for a reversal of the same. So developing protocols for agricultural restoration approaches or techniques, and also, of course, to engage capacity building. Yeah, so agricultural landscape degradation in Kenya comes about because of several reasons, including low youth and women involvement. There is urbanization, there is a soil degradation due to acidity and other processes. We also have implementation of low implementation of capacity. Low implementation capacity among the practitioners. We also have poor institutional coordination and restoration activities, and of course, poor land tenure, and of course, poor markets for agricultural goods, and as unsustainable agricultural practices, and of course, climate change. Yeah, we have out of what the group has done. We went for a workshop where we generated a few concepts, about 6 of them, which are meant to reverse this degradation, depending, of course, they are person-based. Among our 5 persons, we will now tailor them to each of the persons. And of course, we visited some degradation sites in Kitui, where we discussed with the practitioners, because this has to take a bottoms-up approach so that we can really have the people who have felt the degradation on the ground, and then they tell us what they have decided, they have attempted to do, and we also had to come up with the joint solutions with them. And of course, out of the proposals that we developed, most of them will be geared towards or tailored towards reversing the degradation in various parts of the country. Now, here you are seeing in the picture, we were in Kitui somewhere, seeing the degradation, degraded landscapes. And of course, it is out of the workshop that we developed those activities to intervene in various parts of the country. Now, the future plans we have is transitioning into a Kenya Agricultural Landscape Restoration Action Group, which is an open platform domiciled in the Ministry of Agriculture and the Livestock Development, where stakeholders can interact freely. And of course, this workshop was sponsored by ISFA, and ISFA is an organization that jointly coordinates the restoration activities in environment and agriculture. And of course, it is domiciled in agriculture. That is why we decided to retain that kind of arrangement. And then we also plan to have joint resource mobilization for projects. That was our main concern. Thank you. Back to Laura.
Thank you so much. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for all the comments that you've made. To all the speakers, kindly respond to the questions in the chat. And my colleague has also shared in the chat a Google form on how someone can join the various action groups. Thank you so much, and I'd like to hand it back to Mika to take us through the next sections.
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you to the action groups. It's been a very action-packed last year in terms of work on the ground, as well as motivation and working collectively. I would like to now introduce, this was one of the action groups, but was already a little bit underway when we had the conference last year. And then out of the conference, we developed a group that worked on monitoring. And so I'd like to invite Charity Munyasya, who's the DCCF in charge of natural forest conservation from Kenya Forestry Service, to go through a presentation on FOLAREP, which is a process that's been underway in greater intensity in the last year, and the monitoring framework. Charity, over to you.
Thank you all, great participants. Yes, I'm Charity from Kenya Forest Service, and I'm making this presentation on behalf of the group that was working on the landscape restoration monitoring. Yeah, the presentation is background, justification, rationale of forest landscape restoration, and the formulation process, goals, objectives of FOLAREP, coordination and industrial framework, resource required for FOLAREP, monitoring and evaluation framework, and key contributors. So Kenya landscape, including forest, wetlands, coastal areas, rangelands, and croplands. These landscapes are threatened by severe degradation, and the degraded area in Kenya is about 30% of the total land area. And the cost of degradation is 3% of GDP, as it was studied by IMF in 2010. And Kenya is committed to restore 5.1 million hectares by 2030. Although this target, we have increased it because our president has said we need to restore Kenya and increase the tree cover to 30% by 2032, as opposed to our initial target of having 10% tree cover by 2030. This is because of the increased impacts of climate change. So the restoration opportunities in Kenya, as it was standing in 2016, forest and forest lands, the restoration potential was 5.2 million hectares, cropland 7.6 million hectares, and the rangelands, that is where we have the highest potential for restoration, that's 25.7 million hectares, and road signs we have 0.3 million hectares and other areas. So the total of landscape which requires to be restored in Kenya is that 8.8 million hectares. And that is where Kenya got the target of 5.1 million hectares, which now, as per the new presidential directive, we have doubled. The potential for restoration in Kenya is as shown, where we have the restoration in the natural forest, because the natural forests in Kenya are degraded. And we have a total area in the Gazette and forest of 350,000 hectares. And then in the commercial plantations, we target for us to achieve the 30%, we target to do 750,000 hectares. And in the areas, in the degraded other forest areas, we also target to do 500,000 hectares. And the potential areas in farm forestry, this is agroforestry, we are targeting to do 2 million hectares so as to achieve the 30% tree cover by 2032. In the road buffer and other wetlands, we target to do 500,000 hectares. And in the buffer zones, we also have another target of 500,000 hectares. And in the potential restoration in arid areas, the rangelands, this is where we have the highest target of 6.2 million hectares. And we are going to incorporate the approaches that the former presenter, Amina and Dr. Petronila, have explained. And we are going to use every person at all levels, the national, the county level, and every person will participate in this. And we actually intend to use the government structures at all levels, where the main activities will be concentrated at the ward level. and then the sub-county level as they come up to the county and to the national level. And in this planning, in this strategy, the county government was represented. So we expect the county governments to play a key role, because as you can hear, the targets are mentioning about the 10 million hectares. The biggest portion of that is outside the government gazetted forests. So we are expecting every stakeholder to participate and work towards achieving this target by 2030, the target of 30% tree cover by 2032. So the rationale for FORALEP in Kenya, we recognize that our forests and landscapes are severely degraded, and that is why we went for FORALEP. And our initial commitment of 5.1 million hectares by 2030, this is what we have committed to do as a nation, and this is what we have increased. And we realized that the national aspiration of 30% tree cover by 2032, as per UNCBD and UNFCCC, UNCCD, and UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration Ambitions, is going to help us to achieve this. However, the steady progress in restoration has not been achieved due to gaps in coordinating, monitoring, and reporting of restoration efforts in the country. And that is why through this ambitious target of 30% tree cover by 2032, we are going to ensure that there is proper coordination at all levels. Noting that for action and for results to be found in this strategy is because of the action taken by the individual farm owner, who is based at the lowest level in this nation. And that is why the coordination at all levels is very key for this strategy. We are, as a nation, we are about to prepare the detailed work plan of how this strategy is going to be achieved. And because everybody is a stakeholder and will participate and every institution will be involved, we are positive that this ambitious target can be achieved. This is the formulation process from September 2014 to date, 2022. The identification of national land use challenges and restoration options. Then the technical restoration work group was established. And then 2016 is when the prioritization of landscape restoration option for mapping forest and landscape restoration opportunities was recommended. And now in 2016 is when the technical report on the national assessment of forest and landscape restoration opportunities was done. This is the report that is guiding the nation in even doing the ambitious target, because you have to be specific into what areas you are going to restore your landscapes. And Kenya in 2017 committed to restore 5.1 million hectares as per the Bond Challenge. And in 2018-19, the economic analysis of 7 priority options for forest landscape restoration 2019 was done. And in 2020-2021, the technical working group meetings were held to develop the draft FORALEP. And in May this year, there were workshops in all the 47 county governments on the draft forest landscape restoration and the monitoring and evaluation framework, and the finalization of FORALEP of the best consultations were done this year, and the national validation workshop for FORALEP was done. Now, all these processes and the consultations, they have contributed greatly in making this ambitious strategy of 30% tree cover by 2032. And we believe that all what has been happening is going to culminate in the implementation of this strategy in an improved manner. The goal and objective of the FORALEP, it was initially a 5-year plan aiming to accelerate action towards restoring 5.1 million hectares of deforested and degraded landscapes by 2030, and contribute to the achievement of the national aspirations and international obligations. And the overall objective was to restore 2.55 million hectares of degraded landscapes through integrated forest and landscape restoration approaches for improved ecological functionality and the socioeconomic benefits by 2027. But now with the new ambitious target of the 30% tree cover by 2032, we may have to increase this target so that it fits into the bigger target. So the specific objectives of FORALEP were to strengthen policy, regulatory frameworks, and institutional coordination for enhanced forest landscape restoration, and to put 2.55 million hectares of degraded forest and landscapes under restoration for improved climate change resilience, to mobilize resources for public and private partnerships of forest landscape and restoration implementation, and to promote inclusive nature-based value chains for improved livelihoods for communities. In research, monitoring, evaluation, and knowledge management improved. The coordination framework for FORALEP is we will have a national forest landscape restoration advisory committee and the National Forest Landscape Restoration Steering Committee. And then we'll have the county environmental committees, which are already existing as per the MCA, and then with the National Forest Landscape Restoration Technical Committees. This is at the county level, and these are the committees which will be able to follow up what is happening at each county. And then we'll have the Forest Landscape Restoration Secretariat, which will be based at KFS, hopefully, because we have the mandate of conserving, restoring, and developing forestry in this nation. And then we'll have the private sector below that. We'll have the communities, the community forest associations, the water resource authorities, beach management units in the coast, and other community-based organizations. Now, the community organization, these are the ones I'm talking about. At the ward level, we'll have to have a detail on who is there and who is doing what, so that we are not all doing double work, so that we all work together towards achieving this. So if it's an NGO, if it's a CBO working in a particular ward, then we expect all that to be picked at that level and then come up. So that even if it's resources, we don't do double allocation of resources in different places. And then we'll have the national government up to the sub-county level and the county government participating and working with the communities, the community leaders, the group. Everybody has a stake in this, faith-based organizations, everybody will participate in achieving this ambitious target, because as you have all seen, as a nation, we need to fast track these targets because of what you are seeing happening on climate change. Then we'll have the special interest groups also participating. Everybody is a stakeholder. The resources requirement for FORALEP implementation for the policy, regulatory frameworks, and institutional coordination was 1.7 million, and then the 2.55 million acres of degraded forest and landscape restoration was 29 million. The resources for public and private partnership mobilized, we require 712 million, and then the inclusive nature-based value chains promoted, we need 3.5 million, and then the research, monitoring, and evaluation, if it's supported, will require 3.3 million. Now the subtotal, the general coordination and administration expenses, which is 10%, it will 3.8 billion. And the capital investment is 30%, communication publicity 5%, and inflation of 5%. So this FORALEP target of that 8.7 billion will fit into the bigger agenda, which is for the achieving the 30% recovery by 2032. And the budget as at now, it's at 500 billion Kenya shillings. And the detailed work plan is being developed, where all stakeholders are going to be involved at different levels so that we see where each partner fits in. The resources required for FORALEP implementation is the implementation of this plan is estimated to cost 58.2 billion Kenya shillings, which is approximately $48 million over 5 years. And these finances will be mobilized from the national, county governments, budgetary allocation, development partners, the private sector, and international NGOs and CBOs. Now, this is where now the FORALEP is feeding into the bigger agenda of achieving the 30% tree cover by 2032. So FORALEP becomes now part of the big agenda, and we are positive that we are going to achieve this target. The monitoring and evaluation framework, which is going to be used as we achieve these targets. So we have the process indicator category, the area of land under restoration, the restoration project data, the investment, policy and advocacy, value chains, communication, and knowledge. And the outcome is outcome indicator categories, the land health, the land degradation neutrality, the tree cover and the type of tree, the socio-economic, what are the socio-economic benefits, the capacity, the biodiversity, and the climate change. We are positive that there will be intensive monitoring and evaluation and documentation of everything that is being done. We'll use mobile apps and other strategies some like the one that has been developed by KEFRI. We are going to use all the available resources in the country to ensure that this strategy is implemented and the data is being correct and appropriate. We want to acknowledge our partners in this process, FAO, Jeff, of course, the Kenyan government, the county governments, UN Environment, C4, the World Agroforestry Center, UK Pact, KFS and KEFRI, NEMA, KWS, OneDrive Research and Training Institute, CAROS, IUCN, One Resource Institute, WWF, and all of us who are here want to thank you most sincerely for continued collaboration. Let us continue collaborating until we achieve. The key contributors to this document, there is the Ministry of Environment represented by Peterson Kamau, Rosa Kombo of KVS and George Tarus, Meshek Muga of FAO, Free, and then Patrick Muga, Brian Muloka of Council of Governors. We have Jared Duarte of KEFRI, Francis Nyabariga, Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries, and then we have Gerard Gatti of NACOVA. This is National Coordination of Forest, Community Forest Associations. Then we have Tekria Chumba of also NACOVA, and Professor Catherine Moduri of ICAF, Mike Bone Ocheng of C4 ICAF, Veronica Wanyora, Council of Governors, Yupavos Oke of KVS, John Chokwaro, One Resource Institute, Kuga Karek of WWF Kenya, Nundov Makanu of Nature Kenya, Lea Wangombe of Ministry of Energy, Simon Nzuki, and Michael Okio. We want to thank all these contributors to this great document. Together we stand, divided we fall. We will achieve. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Charity, for that great and comprehensive presentation. And thank you so much for linking it into the new presidential directives as well. If there's any questions for Charity, I please ask you to put them in the chat. We're a little bit behind on time. So Charity, if you can just keep an eye out if there's any questions and respond there, that will be much appreciated. We're now moving into our final session, and I would like to invite, and we'll be spotlighting the panelists that are coming on for this final session. Some of them may have dropped off, but I'd like to invite the different panelists, and I'll be speaking and asking each of them questions. So this is our panelists, and I'll be introducing each one as they come online. So I'm hoping that we can start to spotlight our different panelists. And I would like to start with Dr. Peter Manang, who's the Director for Africa from C4 ICRAF. And this panel is intended to bring together a group of stakeholders. We know that there's many stakeholders in the country, but a diversity of the stakeholders that exist in the country, and to see how they can contribute to this restoration movement, what they're undertaking, any new commitments and ideas. I also welcome the panelists to respond to any of the presentations they've seen and to identify opportunities. So each speaker will have about 5 minutes. And first of all, I'd like to welcome Dr. Peter Manang and to ask, particularly C4 ICRAF being a research institution, how can the research side contribute to restoration in the country?
No, thanks, Mika, and thanks everyone. I'm very glad to be here to talk to you. Your question is quite an interesting one, and I've been following all the talks from this morning, from the CRC talk given by Alfred to all of the presentations that I've come across. And I'm really happy, and I think that science plays a big role in this. Research is important. And I like to, as I address that, really just look at a framework that was put by somebody called two people actually, Luc Nakaja and Adriana Vidal of the UNDK, who put up a paper actually that tries to structure the role of research in 3 pathways. The first one is communicating the science for movement building and for speeding up restoration. I think that pathway is very important, and it's really about what do we already know, what are some of the best practices, and how do you bring that into the fray. Of course, many people here do know what those practices are, but one area where I think that we haven't been very strongly conscious of and working on is really the traditional knowledge part of it. I think that it is important that in the work that we do some research to bring traditional knowledge into the game, because it is a big part of success. I remember when ICRAF was working in Tanzania, in the Ngitili, in Shinyanga, one of the biggest things was that of the success was that it was building on a traditional practice, right? And that really made a huge difference. I think things around trade-offs, I think looking at trade-offs is important. It's not something that I've heard a lot of today. How do you balance what the trees are bringing to people, to livelihoods, to the environment, and how are people accessing that scientific information for decision making? I think the second pathway for research to contribute and make a difference is the problem-solving part of the story and the advocacy science part of the story. And I think that this part of problem solving is extremely important, because you identify what the gaps are and you bring the science and the research to inform that process. One main thing that has come up in most of the presentations today, Mika, is the finance side of things, that there is no money. You may know all of these things, but there's no money to implement. And that I think is a huge problem. It is a gap that research needs to sort out. I think one of the big problems there is that we haven't had sufficient business cases for restoration. What is the business case at the pretty much local level? I think the last speaker was saying that it would be good to have restoration models that work for specific places. I think we need to also develop business cases that work for specific places and that can attract investors into restoration. And I think that's at project level. At the national level, I think that we haven't, in the research that we do, demonstrated sufficiently to the Ministry of Finance that restoration is a worthwhile economic investment. We need to demonstrate to the ministry, to demonstrate to private investors that if they invest in restoration, there is a potential for real benefits. I know that Charity was linking restoration to the presidential directive. One of the things that we need to look at is how do we make sure that we can actually make the case that restoration can actually create jobs, restoration can actually generate employment, it can actually create enterprise, it can actually drive industrialization. That is the kind of research that we need to be bringing forth, having that paradigm shift in connecting restoration to the rest of the economy, in connecting restoration to livelihoods in a very clear way. And I think the last part of it that I think is important, the third pathway, is restoration, is the research and science that builds the evidence base for restoration, both from an impact point of view, but also from a lessons learning point of view. I think that science can be very helpful in terms of generating data that shows that restoration is impactful in different ways. And I think that that's some of the things that you've been trying to do with Regreening App, with working in that monitoring group with stakeholders in Kenya to try and build the framework for that monitoring, for that data and science to inform processes. But I also think that we need to look at data to be able to say what is actually working and what is not working. Where is it that we can be more efficient in the way we do restoration? Where is it that we can be more savvy, we can be more effective in the way we do restoration? And what options are really working in the right places? And it's not that if you just have a tree and a seedling, then when you plant it, it will actually grow. There are quality issues around trees and tree seedlings there are quality issues around management. So I think with that, if you look at the role of science as being part of generating the science for restoration movements, for informing processes, the second one being for problem solving and advocacy, and the last one being the science and the data to demonstrate impact and to help learning. I think with those perspective pathways and looking at the specific details, we can actually make big contributions to solving some of the issues that have been raised through the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for those great insights. And I actually want to build off your second point, which is around finance and investment opportunities, and move to Mr. Tommaso Menini, who's from the African Agency for Arid Resources, and is really trying to find viable business opportunities linked to arid areas. Tommaso, thank you so much for joining us. I know you have to leave soon. I welcome you to share some insights.
Thank you so much, Mieke. Apologies, Aminaka. I was traveling. Yesterday was a scheduled trip I could not change, but I'm always very, very open to be part of this discussion, because I know that I am part of the very few private sector actors that actually have invested in landscape restoration. And I really, really liked the intervention from the first panelist. I think that's a very adequate way to see this. How do we create employment? How do we make it attractive for other private sectors? Because unfortunately, I am too often the only guy that can come and talk and say something, because there is not enough private sector of engagement. And the research, we know is absolutely vital, but at the end, we need to make income out of this initiative. So we have been trying to use aloe plants as both a livelihood and a restoration tools. We have started, in fact, looking at this option, working with FAO back in 2019 with in fact Chuck, who's present, also one of the panelists. And in the last 2 years, I've just took it upon me to replicate and scale up this same initiative of aloe plants, which both requalify the soil. Unfortunately, there's not much or any carbon sequestration right there, but the soil is definitely regenerated, and we make a livelihood out of it. So aloe grows in what we consider quintessentially degraded land, and we can make a livelihood for communities. So that's what I came up with to restore the landscape that we work in, which is the arid lands of Kenya, as very clear in our own name. So for me, it's always about promoting this initiative and telling other stakeholders, which I'm happy to do now, to just help us in looking at other areas where we can include this livelihood, which is aloe, and this restoration tool. We are doing the same thing with yet another development partner, and we are trying to do the same in West Pokot. So that's news. It's like this month we are now opening up to another county. For any other stakeholders that is interested in partnering up with us, we have 2 nurseries which can produce up to 100,000 seedlings of aloe secundiflora, which is an indigenous one. So we want to keep trying to fundraise for climate relevant initiative. We always want to work in arid lands. This is what we do. So we are happy to keep continuing working with stakeholders, such as the actors present in this webinar.
Thank you so much, Tommaso. And I agree. I think there is too few people that we call on for these types of examples. And therefore, it does show that we need to create more investment cases. We need to show why this is attractive. And then we need to support these opportunities when they come. So thank you so much for joining us from the field. We really appreciate it. I'm sure there'll be people adding in the chat and wanting to find out more. So thank you so much, Tommaso. So from finance and private sector, I'd like to move over to our representative from the British High Commission, Ms. Anne Nguyen, who's a climate and environment advisor from the British High Commission. And I'd like to ask a little bit about, I know that trade is a big component of the FCDO investment. And I know that the FCDO and the UK government has made a lot of pledges around climate change and investment in Kenya. So coming out of the COP and with these new things on the horizon, and I'd like you to share the perspective from the British High Commission, from FCDO, and the direction that you're taking in Kenya.
So thank you for this opportunity to speak at this event and provide a bit of information on what the UK is doing to support reforestation and forest landscape restoration in Kenya. It's been very interesting sitting and listening to all the initiatives that are happening. And I want to congratulate ICRAF and of course all the other various stakeholders who are actively participating in this work. So very briefly, if I may, just give a broad perspective on a UK Pact. Pact is a program that we have initiated in Kenya to support restoration activities, as well as working on clean growth initiatives in the energy sector. So indeed, Mikey, as you said, we have announced several big announcements in terms of the work we're doing in Kenya, more specifically around trade and investments, but we are also looking at how we can enhance our work in the forest and energy sector and in green finance. So PACT stands for Partnering for Accelerated Climate Transitions, and it's a unique capacity building program that is funded out of the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, otherwise known as FCDO, and the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy base. And it is part of our international climate finance. PACT works in partnership with countries to address emission reduction potential and to support countries to implement and increase ambition on tackling climate change. PACT's aim is to achieve this by working with partner countries to improve their capacity and capability of key institutions so as to reduce emissions and foster inclusive economic growth, but also to address barriers and constraints to clean growth and to pursue opportunities for greater climate ambition. Moving on to Kenya, PACT has been working in Kenya for about 1.5 years when we initiated the project in the middle of COVID, initially as a quick mechanism to support green recovery. But more and more as we worked in the country, we realized the need to have a portfolio approach to the interventions that we were addressing in Kenya. And we have worked very closely with the Ministry of Environment, thank you, Bwana Gishu, and your team, to really try and understand what this portfolio approach would be around restoration, forest restoration. And the purpose of this support is really to help Kenya make a step change in the ability to monitor, report, and verify changes in forests and land use, and to coordinate restoration projects. We hope that this support will improve the ability of Kenya to attract various sources of projects and country-level carbon finance that is available through donor-funded initiatives. During COP, of course, and prior to COP, we've all heard about the level of financing that can come through carbon financing. So REDD+ is, of course, the most predominant model that has been established for channeling payments to incentivize forest-based mitigation. These emerging schemes that are based on REDD+ provide great promise, but there's a demand on greater capabilities for monitoring and verification of emissions, but also in terms of forest coverage. So the work that has been described previously by all the stakeholders is a really important part in trying to address the capabilities and capacity of Kenya to move into a REDD+ situation. Alongside REDD+, we also have, of course, the voluntary carbon markets that have been extremely active in Kenya that basically set out financing from companies, private sector, who are looking to purchase carbon offsets. And these options are set to grow even more. So I'm glad to hear that there is also this focus around how we can bring on board private sector. So very quickly, just to say that in 2021, we did launch 2 nature-based solutions projects under the Green Recovery Challenge, and this was promoting NBS and national monitoring for land restoration through ICRAF, who have done an excellent job in deploying gender transformative approaches for forest restoration in Makueni County and enabling a successful MRV of various ecological zones from coastal forests to semi-arid areas. So a lot of this is now coming forward and was presented earlier. And we do hope that this will improve Kenya's REDD+ readiness and provide data to the National Forest Monitoring System, as well as an updated forest reference level. And we also supported WWF through a project known as Greening Kaptagat, where they were training communities on agroforestry and climate smart agricultural projects. So in terms of opportunities, during the scoping of our country program, we established the strong rationale for improving access to finance. And this is the carbon markets that I was talking about earlier. We've seen this happening in the voluntary carbon markets, for instance, the Chulu Hills REDD+ project. And we do believe that such an approach would offer benefits of mobilizing finance that is available to expand action on Kenya's landscape. Initiatives such as the new LEAF coalition, this is lowering emissions by accelerating forest finance, is something that we hope to expand in Kenya. And we'll be looking to discuss this further with the Ministry of Environment. And as Mesraj and Micah, as you did mention earlier, private sector engagement is extremely important and critical in conservation and restoration activity, not just in terms of financing, but also future sustainability. However, as I mentioned, a greater degree of institutional capability is required to monitor and coordinate multiple projects that will be nested within larger jurisdictions of land. This is what we call the jurisdictional and nested REDD+ requirements. So finally, over the next 3 years, the UK will be supporting the UK through the NBS project portfolio, will be supporting strengthening of regulation and coordination and financing of forest conservation and restoration activities. We have identified 3 project partners who will support emission reductions, NDC implementation activities, enhance Kenya's NDC ambition over time, and promote a green recovery in Kenya. These projects will be focused in supporting the REDD+ activities and strategy, but also, as Madam Charity highlighted, the follow-up. We do hope that this support will contribute to addressing key policy and institutional gaps in conservation, management, and restoration of forests in Kenya, and continued development and implementation of the national REDD+ system. Thank you, Mikey.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that really comprehensive outline of where some of the opportunities are and how the UK is contributing to them. We really greatly appreciate it. And so from here, I'd like to move over to Mr. Hausner Wendo. He comes from World Vision Kenya and is the acting director for Restore Africa in the country. And Restore Africa is one of those programs that's really focusing on scaling up FMNR, which World Vision is renowned for in Kenya, but also has been able to access carbon finance to be able to implement the program. So Mr. Hausner Wendo, if I could invite you to share a little bit about World Vision's approach to supporting restoration and some of the opportunities you see.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning to everyone. I can share one or two in the time provided about what's happening at World Vision. As you know, as an institution, we implement our program targeting children and their households. So a lot of our programs are built around well-being of children and their families and households. Some of our approaches are increasingly based on child-based advocacy and targeting households. So for restoration, we mainly target what I can refer to as agroforestry largely, but farm forestry. So approaches such as farmer-managed natural regeneration are approaches that we have deployed in our programming to basically target households and their farms so that they can be able to participate effectively in restoration in agricultural landscapes. So basically what's happening is that traditionally the organization has focused on sponsorship and child well-being, learning, that is child learning and so on. But in recent times, we are moving along with the the times and recognize the sustainable development challenges that are arising through climate change and other environmental change challenges. And so there is a strategy in place now, a 5-year strategy on environmental stewardship that guides the organization towards scaling up some of the activities we have been doing for, among other things, landscape restoration. As I've indicated, we are working with farmers, and this is mostly through our area programs across different programs in Kenya. For example, we are in 38, I think currently 40 counties, and where we work through area programs. And our approach currently is to integrate restoration through farmer-managed natural regeneration and other agroforestry practices within those area programs, so that one of the activities that will be going on as part of our program design is that we will be building capacity of households to be able to effectively participate in restoration at farm level. At the same time, we'll also be working with the county governments. We're already working with county governments, more than 10 counties across Kenya, in advocacy and supporting policy initiatives. And our preferred approach in this case is also bringing children to the fore of this and utilizing some of our models, such as what we call empowered worldview model, which brings together different tools and techniques to encourage people to be part of restoration as livelihood activities to improve their income and strengthen their livelihood base through various lessons shared, approaches, and so on. And as part of that initiative, we are also working through faith-based approaches as an organization that prides itself for being Christian. So there are various things we are doing. We are involved in various programs. For example, the Regreening Africa program, which we have implemented in a number of counties, basically Homa Bay and Migori, but also scaling up to other counties. We are developing new programs. There are new programs that have come up recently. For example, we have a very, very fresh program that should be implemented starting next year through funding from KOICA. And that one will focus on the landscape between Kajiado and Narok. So it will integrate on-farm restoration, but also restoration of pasture lands, that's rangelands, and some of the forests around the hills bordering these counties. So we are already engaging with the county governments and other government officials working around for forest landscape restoration, but also on-farm restoration. We also have a program that has been going on in Homa Bay, which is a scale-up. When we talk about financing, we are looking at all potential sources of finance. One of them is through private grants by targeting private funders, both in the private sector, but also just philanthropists who are interested in restoration. We have been able to work with one such family, and through that we are, through gender-based approaches, scaling up the regreening work.
So much, Hausner. Would you like to share a final remark?
Final remark is that we are also working with other organizations around carbon financing, and the Restore Africa program is one such program. So for Kenya, we are implementing this with a number of other organizations across 4 counties, potentially 5 counties. And the important thing is that there are very good new lessons for that particular source of finance. It has great potential, but it has many constraints. And I know we will get opportunities to be able to share lessons and so that we can see how this can be scaled up as a source of finance for restoration in Kenya.
Thank you so much, Hausner, and great to end on that point. And I think there will be a lot to discuss. So thank you so much. The next panelist I'd like to turn to is Dr. Winnie Musila. She's the Director of Ecological Research, Planning and Audit for Kenya Water Towers Agency. And Winnie, we know that water towers are critical for the country, for the supply of water and other ecosystem services. And we know this is a key area for restoration. Would you be able to share a brief summary of how KWTA is contributing to restoration in the country.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thank you to all the presenters and participants. I would like to share some of the approaches that we are using to ensure that the water towers are conserved. One important thing is that we do research and monitoring, and this research is important because it enables us to know the status of the water towers. So you're able to know where to do rehabilitation, for example. So we map the degraded areas, we map the biodiversity hotspots, and also the critical catchment areas within the water towers. Then apart from this, we do stakeholder mapping to know who is doing what within that particular water tower. And this helps us to know, to come up with a stakeholder engagement plan when we are doing our implementation. And then we also know, we also collect data on threats. What is contributing to the degradation of the water tower? And all this information goes into what we call a status report. So far, we've been able to come up with 23 status reports, various water towers. And this information also helps us to come up with what we call ecosystem conservation plans. So we come up with a 10-year plan, which shows what interventions need to be undertaken to reverse the degraded areas within the water tower. Another strategy that we use is through securing and protection. For securing and protection, we are focused more in the Mau Forest Complex. This is the biggest water tower in the country. And in this, we've been able to protect 143,000 hectares in the Mau Forest Complex using what we call a joint enforcement unit. So we brought in forces from KWS, KFS, and the county government, and help to enforce protection of the Mau Forest Complex. Another thing is that we realized there was one of the forest blocks within Mau that was highly degraded through encroachment, and we were able to reclaim 13,000 hectares in this forest block. And over time, we've been able to fence off 30 kilometers, and we've seen regeneration taking place in that particular area. Another thing we do is rehabilitation through tree planting. And we've tried to bring as many partners as possible to support in rehabilitation. For example, in Masai Mau, we've introduced what we call adopt a block. We have divided the forest block into various components. And so we bring in partners to adopt various components so they can help us to rehabilitate the block. Then we promote sustainable land use, sustainable land management practices at microcatchment level. So we promote gully rehabilitation, riverine rehabilitation in particular water towers. And then lastly, we also promote livelihood programs. This is through beekeeping. For example, in Kirisia, we've worked closely with communities there and promoted them to do beekeeping. So this is an alternative source of income so that people don't continue degrading the water towers. And then in Kaptagat, we've also done what we've established a bamboo demo site. We know bamboo is very key in restoration. So through all these approaches, we can see that first, information is very key. Planning is very key. Monitoring is very key. And if I bring the issue of monitoring as the Kenya Water Tower Agency, we have established what we are calling the Integrated Water Tower Monitoring System, whereby it's a web platform where we keep all our data and share with our stakeholders. So you're able to know trends of how land use, land cover has changed, for example, of a particular water tower. So, I believe with science-driven restoration, we'll be able to achieve much. And, by building stakeholder partnerships, we'll achieve much in restoration of the water towers and all the landscapes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winnie, for that great outline of what Kenya Water Towers is working on and some of the opportunities for science-driven restoration and evidence-based approaches. Thank you so much, Winnie. And for the next panelist, I would really like to move on to Mr. Meshach Muga. He's the National Project Manager. He's a National Project Manager at Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, focused in Kenya. Now, Meshach, I would like to ask you to reflect both on what FAO is doing in Kenya, but also on the United Nations Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, which FAO is one of the co-leads in, and how that links to work in the country. Meshach, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mick, for an opportunity to present on behalf of FAO. My bosses were not able to come, but they have given me this chance to attend and participate. So in a nutshell, I would just say that FAO has a dedicated sub-program dealing with natural resource management. And one of the key components is forestry, the other one is land, and then the other one is water. And I would also want to say that on the issues of restoration, FAO works with various partners, government agencies, counties, and also various local communities. In the lands program, we have a digitization project funded by EU on digitization of land records and processes that is going to really help in efficient and effective land governance in Kenya, which will support restoration activities. FAO has several restoration projects supported by JEF. We have a JEF 5 in Kirisia Forest. We have JEF 6 in Mount Kulal and Kogodo landscapes. We have a JEF 7 that is under development, and also JEF 8. And basically, these projects are focusing on policy integration. As you have heard before, we have been developing various policies and various action plans like FOLAREP. We are developing a non-timber forest products strategy. We're also developing equitable benefit sharing policy, equitable benefit sharing regulation that is going to help in the forest sector, among others. We have also been supporting participatory forest management plans, development, and also renewal. FAO is also involved in capacity building of community groups, county governments, and national agencies on various areas. Key also is the development of bioenterprise, because we have realized that restoration cannot be effective unless we develop and promote bioenterprises as low-lying fruits for restoration, where now the communities can be able to get some incomes. We are also targeting development of sustainable cash and food crops. This is especially in the new program JEF 7 in Mount Elgon. We are also thinking of sustainable use and management of coastal forests and mangrove ecosystems, linking blue and green economies. This is in the JEF 8 project. I would wish to let participants know that we have opportunities, as now FAO is developing a county program framework 2023 to 2027, and we'll be having a stakeholder forum next week in Naivasha, and the stakeholders have an opportunity to chip in on the areas of interest which can be included in this program. What we are promoting is synergies and complementarities amongst partners for us to have effective restoration efforts in the country. On UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration that started in 2021 and spans to 2030, I would wish to say, to confirm here that FAO is working together with UN Environment, and FAO is the lead agency in this. And so far, an action plan has been developed and released in August 2022. And it is estimated that a total of US dollars 100 million is to be raised by 2030 for the implementation of this. So this provides really good opportunities for us as a country and other countries. However, a few barriers have been identified, and this include political goodwill, legislative and policy environments, public awareness, scientific research, finance, and technical capacity. So thanks so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Meshach, for outlining the work in Kenya, as well as for the UN Decade. And there is a website for that if people want to get involved and to see the action groups. I know we're coming close to the end of our time, and I beg for you to stay with us for another 15 minutes as we hear from our final speakers and go to our closing remarks. Dr. Saif Hamisi, Director of East African Rangeland Program for Conservation International. I know that Conservation International has a slightly different approach, and in this part of the world is focusing a lot on carbon, but I know you're from the Rangeland Program, so we'd love to hear what CIA is focusing on and the contribution and the opportunities.
Thank you very much, Ameke, and good afternoon, everyone. Conservation International in Kenya is focusing on a number of projects, programs, but key thing is rangelands, because Kenya is 85% rangelands, and from some of our speakers, we could hear the kind of commitment on restoration, 25 million hectares of restoration in Kenya on rangelands. So big opportunity for restoration in Kenya. on rangelands, and the Kenya office is prioritizing rangeland restoration for their work. Our thinking is having around 3.5 million hectares, 4.5 million hectares, sorry, of restoration in Kenya in the next 5 years. So really a lot of work to be done, with our focus mainly working with the Ministry of Environment to put together the necessary mechanisms, or supporting the ministry to have the necessary mechanisms for restoration of rangelands, prioritizing especially grasslands that have been really suffered a lot of degradation. Wetlands have also suffered. So really looking at how to get the restoration work to happen. We are looking at restoration in Kenya in a couple of ways. That we've had the first phase of restoration in this country as making the commitments. We entered the second phase of setting up the institutional framework that can deliver large-scale restoration. I think we have most of that in place. And now I think we are entering the stage of scaling up and accelerating restoration. And we heard from a number of presenters about the different methods that are being used on restoration. CI is looking strongly at improved land management, improved livestock management as a way of restoration. We are also looking at carbon financing, which Mieke, you alluded to as one of the strengths of CI, really getting the lands the lands focused and not contracting is the wrong word to put, but really committed to restoration and keeping the land to restocking carbon. So carbon financing is coming out strongly, and of course the traditional restoration action on the ground that is happening at different landscapes. So looking together at all those pieces of work, we are looking at 4.5 million hectares in the next 5 years. However, we are also looking at policy. Policy is the ingredient which will make or break restoration in Kenya. And I think we aspire, and indeed right now, I think we are on target to have the right restoration mechanism, the right restoration policies at national and county level, so that the restoration efforts that ourselves and partners are putting in place at national and county level really get anchored by the county targets, the national economic targets, livelihood targets, so that as we do restoration, we actually uplift the livelihoods of people, we uplift the economy of the areas where restoration is taking place, and we make restoration relevant to the larger population, larger Kenyan population. We are looking at working in the areas that we're targeting right now, Kajiado, Narok, Makueni, Taita Taveta, and Kilifi, Isiolo, and some counties like Garissa and Tana River might be of interest as we go forward as well. The interventions we are looking at here, community-centered restoration, land and livestock management, and I would like to mention under land and livestock management, the model that we are promoting in CI, we are calling it Herding for Health, which is designed through a One Health approach. I'm going to put a link in the chat where you can have a look at this model. It's a partnership between CI and Peace Park Foundation, really a good model that can help livestock industry in Kenya, the pasture reorganization in the context that livestock is managed properly and livestock movement is managed, pasture land is well managed, and therefore you restore the livestock health, you restore the rangeland health, you restore the livelihood of communities. So really a model that we can take up. Final remark is addressing the needs of communities is at the center of CI work. So we really are looking at large-scale implementation with communities. Youth and women are particularly of interest to CI to ensure that we deliver on restoration. private sector is our key strength, and we are very happy to work with the Kenya team to bring in the private sector participation in restoration in Kenya. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for those insights, and wonderful to hear. So now to our final contribution for the panel today, coming from World Resources Institute, Mr. Peter Ndunda. He's a senior AFR 100 associate, and I know that Peter's been working in this space for a long time, and I'm hoping also, Peter, that you can reflect on some of what you've heard, as well as the contribution of WRI to restoration in Kenya. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mika. And first, I would like to thank you and the entire ICRAF team for coordinating this national conference and for bringing us together today. Thank you so much. My name is Peter Ndunda. I am a senior technical advisor for our restoration program in WRI. As you've asked me, I want to build a little bit on the excellent points that my colleague, my friend Meseret shared with us, the regional AFR 100 coordinator, and say that the first phase of AFR 100 that was between 2016 and 2021 specifically focused on laying down the foundation for rapid scaling of restoration work. And within this first phase, there were three main areas of focus. The first area was focused on cultivating political will. The second area was on building enabling environment. And the third area was on catalyzing implementation. This year, we launched the second phase of AFR 100, which focuses on accelerating implementation on the ground, building on the lessons that we learned from the first phase. So then the question is, what have we learned? What have we learned so far? A couple of months ago, we released a request for proposal, and within a period of 2 weeks, we received 3,200 applications from across 27 countries out of the 32 countries for AFR 100. Out of these 3,200 projects, we selected 100 projects for funding. And these 100 projects are sharing a pot of money that has 15 million USD across these local NGOs, restoration businesses, to catalyze their restoration efforts. But why am I sharing this? Why are these statistics important? When we looked at these numbers, we realized that only 5% of this big pot of 3,200 applicants qualified to what we would call fundable project, or what we would call investment ready, while 75% of this pot of 3,200 is what we would call early stage, not investor ready. Now, these statistics are very important because it shows that we clearly have to figure out how to accelerate and scale restoration implementation on ground sustainably, as Anne mentioned earlier. For us to do that, we have to flip these statistics. We have to ensure that this 75% has access to finances, because these are the businesses, these are the local implementers, the local NGOs on the ground that will help build the sustainability that Anne was talking about. If the businesses are not catalyzing implementation on the ground, we will never achieve the 5.1 million hectares we're talking about, or in the case of AFR 100, we'll never achieve the 128 million hectares that have been committed by the countries or by the nations or by the presidents in these countries. So within WRI now, we are working with the local implementers to, number one, identify the technical gaps and the needs that should be addressed to make this shift, to flip these statistics working with the local businesses, the SMEs, nature-based solution businesses to ensure that we are addressing these needs. So number one, we identify those technical gaps in the needs. Then number two, we help address these needs through technical assistance support, for example, through our WRI's Land Accelerator program, and of course, through other programs that our technical partners, including organizations represented in this conference, coming in to support those technical needs. And then number three, most importantly, ensuring that we connect these businesses and these local implementers, local NGOs with funders through either our WRI tools that we are already doing, or we have a matchmaking platform that matches project with funders and investors that we call the Terra Match. The truth is, we have amazing projects on the ground, but what we need to do, we need to empower them. We need to identify their technical capacity gaps. We need to identify what needs they have and provide them with resources so that they can scale those amazing projects and work on the ground. That is what we need to do. We need to ensure these businesses are successful so that restoration work can be scaled sustainably and at scale. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. I think that's a wonderful way to close this panel. I think there's some clear opportunities. There's areas we need to focus. It's great to hear how many different organizations and groups and local organizations are working to fill these gaps. I really want to thank all the panelists for sharing these different perspectives, and we welcome other additions in the chat from those that may not have been represented on this panel, but are doing incredible work in the country. I'd now like to pass over back to Laura to lead us to invite the closing remarks for this conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mika. I'm honored to invite Dr. Christopher Wanga, the Director of Policy Research and Regulation, who is here to represent the Principal Secretary from the State Department of Livestock, to give closing remarks. Welcome, Dr. Christopher.
Yeah, thank you very much. It gives me great pleasure to represent the Principal Secretary, State Department of Livestock, who is supposed to be closing this very, very important meeting for us. And without any much ado, I will straight away go to his speech. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to be with you today to officiate the closing ceremony on this special occasion of the Kenya National Landscape Restoration Scaling Conference, with the aim of building synergies among stakeholders involved in rangeland restoration initiatives and efforts, as we also take stock of the progress we have made to achieve the agreed action plans since our last conference in 2021. It is now a globally known fact that climate change is here with us, and its devastating effects are being felt more adversely in the rangelands. For this reason, the recently concluded COP27, which was held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, came up with a global climate actions that resolved to, among other outcomes, limit the global average temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius in order to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Achieving this will require unprecedented cooperation across all of society and the economy, addressing the adaptation gap and strengthening resilience to become the foundation of sustainable development pathway requires implementation in a manner that builds non-party stakeholders' contributions to address the loss and damage through equitable, holistic, and collaborative efforts. I am happy that this conference has already addressed some of these concerns. Ladies and gentlemen, the government of Kenya is committed to land restoration and has therefore made several international, regional, and national restoration targets. Commitments include the Bond Challenge, the New York Declaration on Forests, the Aichi Target 15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, the Glasgow Declaration on Forests and Land Use, Sustainable Development Goals, and the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration 2031 to 2030. On a regional level, the country has committed to restore 5.1 million hectares of degraded lands by 2030 under the African Forest Restoration Initiative, which will ensure that it meets the country's Bond Challenge commitment. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all aware that the government has committed to ensure that the country has 30% tree cover by 2050 and to reduce 50% of greenhouse gases emission from the forest sector by 2030 as part of its updated nationally determined contribution to climate change. Most recently, ladies and gentlemen, we can recall that His Excellency the President, Dr. William Ruto, in his 2022 Mashujaa Day speech, mentioned that 10 counties with the lowest forest cover come from the rangelands. He further emphasized that the government will spearhead transformation of forestry and rangeland rehabilitation to support greening of Kenya in order to combat climate change. To this end, he mentioned designing of a special presidential forestry and rangeland restoration program, which was in its final stages. His Excellency finally issued a presidential directive to plant 5 billion trees in the next 5 years and an additional 10 billion by the year 2032. As partners in rangeland restoration, we can leverage on this momentum to build synergies towards attracting resources to contribute towards this achievement. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm aware that the Forest and Landscape Restoration Implementation Plan 2022-2027 was developed to ensure that the government meets all its commitments. FOLAREP aims to accelerate actions to restore deforested and degraded landscapes for resilient socioeconomic development, improve the ecological functioning, and contribute to the realization of the national aspirations and international obligations. Ladies and gentlemen, agricultural landscapes or croplands and rangelands restoration offer a big opportunity in the achievement of Kenya's restoration targets. An assessment of restoration opportunities in the country showed that croplands and rangelands had a restoration potential of 7.6 million hectares and 25.7 million hectares respectively. Targets to restore croplands and rangelands have therefore been set at 2.9 million hectares and 1.9 million hectares by 2030 respectively. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development is delighted to be associated with the National Landscape Restoration Scaling Conference and restoration movement it has created. The ministry is involved with various action groups that resulted from the conference and are part of this movement. These are Landscape Restoration Monitoring Technical Working Group that has successfully developed a national forest and landscape restoration monitoring framework, the Agricultural Landscape and Restoration Action Group that is led by the State Department for Crop Development and Innovation Management. It brings together actors working to restore agricultural landscapes. The Kenya Rangelands Restoration and Conservation Action Group brings together actors in the protection and restoration of rangelands. The Department of Livestock is an active member of this action. Great strides and efforts towards rehabilitation of degraded rangelands, key among them being policy and strategy development, support to implementation of projects, and mobilization of human and financial resources. We therefore remain committed to supporting the Kenyan restoration movement by active participation. As I conclude, I must state that we are grateful to development partners whose effort restoration in Kenya by bringing together and linking multiple dimensions. Thank you most sincerely for creating time to attend this virtual work, especially as we address the challenges associated with the director. With those few remarks, allow me, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for giving those wonderful closing remarks and highlighting the importance of rangelands and cropland restoration to achieving the presidential directive and all the different targets that the government has committed to in terms of restoration and other related ones. So we're coming to the end of the conference, and I'd like to thank everyone, all the participants, for being with us from the beginning, from the various pre-thematic webinars that we've had since the beginning of October, in November, and now finally in the conference. I'd like to especially thank the presenters and speakers for today. Thank you, Mr. Alfred Kishu, for taking your time to be here. Ms. Charity Mdoni as well, Dr. Christopher Wanga for giving remarks on behalf of the Permanent Secretary in charge of the State Department of Livestock, all the various presenters who presented on the various work that the action groups are doing. We're really grateful. All the speakers in the panel, thank you all for your wonderful contributions. And this conference would not have been a success without you. And lastly, to all the participants who have been with us, a very big thank you for staying with us till the end. And just to encourage that, let's just continue moving this restoration movement forward. And it's just really inspiring to see what everyone is doing, because it's all part of the movement. So thank you all and have a lovely day.